promote every day as well. And the worst thing that's ever happened with exploitation of our lands, like before colonization, 100% of the land was of North America or Turtle Island was indigenous land. And now as we speak, as I stand here, less than 1%. So, you know, the things that have happened, that puts into a little bit context of original peoples and our land. And with the treaties, we were promised education and health. And so a lot of times you hear people saying, "Oh, they get everything for free. They get education, they get medicine," and it's not free. It was promised in our treaties, and also taxpayers. They're not taxpayers. Well, you know, I am a taxpayer. I've been paying taxes since I started to work. So the only time that we're tax exempt is when we're working on the reserves. So those are some misconceptions that we have. But also one of the things that I wanted to talk about is that dark history. When the commissioners, there was three commissioners that interviewed 6,000 residential school survivors. And they took a couple of years. That was the lead investigator was Justice Murray Sinclair. He was a senator, and also the Willie Littlechild and Marie Wilson. So they went across Canada and interviewed all these survivors, and they came up with these 94 recommendations, which are now calls to action. And I find that since retiring, I retired from SIT in 2015. I was a dean of health there for 21 years, real small Indigenous college, but nonetheless, it was a lot of the things that I do now has a lot to do with that, with some of the history, some of my history. And when I retired there in 2015 is just the beginning of TRC calls to action. And we found my best friend, Gilbert Q-Step, just passed away not too long ago in November. I met him there for the first time, and we noticed that with the TRC calls to action, that people were starting to ask us to come for prayers. They started land acknowledgements. They started asking us to do pipe ceremonies. They started asking us to bless lands. They asked us to like what I'm doing now, open big conferences or even just workshops and seminars and so on. And we also told our stories. Gilbert was also a residential school survivor, and how being abused at 7 years old, 6, 7 years old, I started my life hating myself. But then just before that, though, I'd like to say also that I was already, the reserves and the First Nations were already full of alcoholism by the time I was born, including my parents, my aunties, my uncles, my grandparents. I'm a third generation survivor. My mother was also a residential school survivor. And some of the things that happened there, you probably hear about. You don't have the time now to talk about it, but horrendous things. My two older brothers were also sexually abused in those schools. And so when I never want people to forget that, because you see us overrepresented in the healthcare system, in justice, as well as child apprehension. So we see a lot of our when we go to jail, sometimes up to 70% Indigenous, and that's relative to the residential schools. Saskatchewan currently has the highest rate of domestic violence in the country, and that most residential schools were here. So it's very relative. And when I talk to people that serve the justice system, I always hope that you have that time, or that you've studied that dark history on how we were in those schools, and we were damaged, and we were raped and beaten, and we were told not to love, not to show love. If we ever even caught, me and my sister got caught hugging, and we were beaten. So we became loveless parents. We became parents that couldn't show love to our own children, and my mom included. And when you look at the Western sense of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a person needs love to survive. And of course, a lot of times we didn't show that love. I know that my mom loved us, and our parents loved us, but they didn't know how to show it. So now we have our children going up with residential schools, and the perpetrators our men became perpetrators of domestic violence and of sexual abuse, and it still carries on. That's why it's called intergenerational trauma. And that's why our jails are full of Indigenous peoples, is because of that dark history and the things that happened to us as Indigenous peoples. And like I said, I was a mother. I was an alcoholic through, I married another alcoholic. He was also a residential school survivor. So there was lots of domestic violence. I ended up being in a hospital many times with broken bones. I ended up also being in a hospital from trying to end my life 3 or 4 times. Did it a couple times where I was put on life support for 2 weeks because I tried to do away with my life. And so when I know Creator had a plan for me. And as I stand here today, when I think about that past, I don't ever try to make anybody feel guilty, because you weren't responsible for this. None of us were. We weren't there in that history, but we are responsible for what we do as we go forward. And that's including not forgetting that history. And I'm very proud of the post-secondary schools, as well as the elementary schools that are now doing land-based learning and all that. And so they're learning a lot of things like that. But my main thing is don't judge the people that are. I work with Elizabeth Fry as well. I work with, I do 5 to 10 sharing circles every week. That's my forte. That's my most important thing that I do is I speak on behalf of those that don't have a voice. I work with the women that are at risk. I work with women that are being right now facing sexual abuse, domestic violence, intimate partner domestic violence, women that are being put on the streets, women that are being coerced into gangs, and giving their power away to abusive relationships. And many of them end up in jail, in prison for various reasons, because they want to escape that ugliness that people feel. And when I was, my alcoholism was only on weekends, so I was able to finish high school. I was also be able to attend the University of Saskatchewan. And some of you may know that I just got the Lifetime Achievement Award for the U of S alumni this past October. And but I never forget where I came from. I always say, how did this little res girl that like sexual abuse and just fighting and whatever it was to survive, how did I ever get that the award? So I think that I'm very honored that I get recognized by the post-secondary institutes. And also, I can't keep up with the demand for my time. Like this morning, just every day. Like and I think that reaching out to other elders as well, I always try to build them up. Some of them are not ready. Some of the elders also never forgave. They were hurt so badly that they're not ready to talk. They're not ready to forgive. And they could find them punitive sometimes, punitive elders that will just, are just angry. And I'm not one of those. I always say that I was destined to go through the things that I did to be able to do the work that I do now, because I would not be trusted by the clients that I work with. I also work with the acute care centers, like the hospitals, and I did have a fob where I used to be able to go into emergency and talk. I go to the detox as often as I can in the mornings to help people that are just detoxing from drugs. And I also go to the mental health and addictions downtown at Sturdy building, and I go to the Calder Center. And last night I was at Elizabeth Fry. So there's lots of people that are suffering out there, the women. And a lot of these kids, a lot of the people that are in the cities now never had a chance. They grew up with alcoholism, they grew up with drugs, and they don't know anything else. They don't know the language, they don't know the culture, they don't know a lot of things. But there's good groups now that are coming up that I work with, like Possibilities, EFRI, all those people that are trying to do the best they can now for the especially women wanting their kids back, and even men that are single parent fathers. I see them crying like at Calder, I want my kids. I want to be a role model for my kids. So my message to them is be the change you want to see, and also forgiving that past, forgiving the ugliness that happened to you to move forward in a better way. Because I've totally forgiven my perpetrators. I've asked them to go to heaven. I asked them to, and you know, the Creator, God, whoever, it's the same higher power, but always promoting a holistic healing, mentally, physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally. You have to be, you have to have all those in order to be a full balanced person in your life. And when I started this work, I was at Elizabeth Fry telling them all this physically, mentally, and I was standing there, I was 225 pounds. And I thought, when I was thinking, I'm a fraud here. I'm not looking after my health. I'm obese. And so that next morning, 5 years ago, I said, you know what? I'm going to walk the talk. And as I stand here, I walk this university and all over the place here, sometimes 3 to 10 kilometers a day. And I do it every day. I've lost 65 pounds. So I try to be a mentor. I try to show them that it can be done. When I go, I tell my story. There's a little res girl that was, you know, grew up in poverty with domestic violence, with all the things that you're all facing, and I've made it. So if you can do it, I can. I mean, if I could do it, then you can. So I try to be the mentor that out there, and I hopefully that I'll keep doing this for as long as I can. I'm 74 years old this year, and to keep doing the work that I'm doing for as long as I can, because like I said, the Creator put me here to do this work. With that, I know you have an agenda, so I'm just going to quickly say I already smudged and prayed before I came here, so I'm just going to acknowledge that I ask the Creator to be with us as we sit here today. That the Creator help us with the 7 sacred teachings, loving one another, having respect for one another, sharing our wisdom. And one of the most important one is wisdom and courage to be able to have those hard conversations as it relates to incarceration of our women and so on. And the whys of that, and the why is that dark history. So that's I always want to make people aware of that. And I'm really want to thank Saskatoon for all the work you're doing as allies. One of the commissioners, Willard Littlechild, I talked to him and he said, you know, Judy, be proud to be from Saskatoon. They're doing so much more per capita, so much more than any other city other than Winnipeg. So be proud of that. And so with that, I'm just gonna stop here now and let you carry on with your, and again, so honored to be a part of this discussion. Miigwech.
What? Oh, okay. Oh, we're doing things on the fly, so come on, come. Yes, he wants me to take a picture with you. Okay, now that we are prayed for, I just want to thank Elder Pelly for this wonderful description of what adversity can turn into resilience and hope under the guise of forgiveness. And we really appreciate you starting us on the good foot. Just for your information, the topic today, improving the lives of women behind bars, was something that the team in the Forensic Center chose. I'm excited to work with a team that I describe as small but mighty. We're a small group, but the work we do is amazing. So I'm really glad they're all represented here. I won't have to call all their names. You meet them later on. In case this is your first time of being here, the washrooms, once you come out of this hall, is on your right, and there's the different washrooms there if you can, if you need them. We do have later on some infographics that are displayed out during the break when we're having refreshments, and please take advantage of those. They describe the work that we've done in the Forensic Center over the years. We've been in a mode of trying to translate all our work into relevant, impact-oriented work through knowledge translation. The public forum is one of the ways we disseminate information. One of the other methods is the Violence and Aggression Symposium that we have every 2 years. And this public forum has hosted a number of speakers, very excited about today's topic, and is really bringing the university community and the members of public to understand some of the work and the latest issues that we have. As you know, when we talk about latest issues, you will all agree with me that one of the preoccupying things that we've been dealing with is as the tariffs. And when you look at some of the work of mothers and child units in the US, I wish they can put some tariffs on that so that they don't come across to us. So we have the experts in the field in the Canadian one that we're going to be hearing about. Without much, we're going to go into a period of receiving greetings, and it's my real pleasure to welcome the Associate Vice President, Research of the University of Saskatchewan, Professor Darcy Mosiniuk, to bring greetings on behalf of the university. Please put your hands together for him.
Well, thank you very much and good afternoon, everyone. I'm delighted to bring greetings and welcome you to today's public forum, Improving the Lives of Mothers in Prison. I did want to start by just thanking Elder Pele. I know she had to run for her for the opportunity, the honor of listening and understanding to her powerful words and stories. She truly is a gift to the University of Saskatchewan. So on behalf of our institution, and more specifically President Peter Stoichev, Vice President Research Baljit Singh, I want to express my gratitude to everyone here and to those online who have joined us, whether you have a long history of collaboration with the center, are beginning to explore new opportunities, or are interested in today's forum. Your presence highlights the importance of fostering relationships and enhancing understanding. Thank you very much to our guest speakers, Martha Painter from the University of New Brunswick in Fredericton, and Robin Hanson from our own College of Law here at the University of Saskatchewan. A special welcome to Kathy Neal. Good to see you again, Deputy Commissioner, Indigenous Corrections, Corrections Services Canada, and Kim Odette, Executive Director, Research and Implementation from the Saskatchewan Ministry of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety. The Center for Forensic Behavioral Sciences and Justice Studies has made a significant impact since its inception in 2011. A unique collaboration between the University of Saskatchewan, Corrections Service Canada, and the Saskatchewan Ministry of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety. The center, with more than 24 faculty from our colleges of nursing, law, medicine, and arts and science, enables interdisciplinary research, education, and engagement activities to build capacity, activate new knowledge, and best inform public policy and practices to strengthen public safety, while importantly also supporting individuals in the criminal justice system, wellness, and well-being. It's an important task. Since its inception, funding and granting programs from the Forensic Center have supported 55 graduate students and 31 faculty research projects. Postdoctoral fellows, 3 alone in the past 3 years with the new Living Skies program, have gone into consultancy, government positions, and academia. The Forensic Center's contribution to finding and training tomorrow's experts and leaders is noteworthy, as is its meaningful interactions with our communities and Indigenous partners, interactions that are both vital and imperative. Today is an exciting opportunity for those of you to build and deepen connection, a chance to imagine and discover the many and more possibilities ahead. I encourage you all to actively listen, to participate, to share your experiences and explore new collaborations. I appreciate everyone being here, both in person and online, and I want to especially thank Dr. Mansfield Mela and the entire team at the Forensic Center for the success of today's event. But I also want to especially thank you for your hard work and dedication during the other 364 days of the year. So thank you once again.
Thank you, Professor Masiniok. And again, it's now my pleasure to invite Kim Odette to bring greetings on behalf of the Ministry of Corrections, Policing, and Public Safety. You will note that throughout our existence since 2011, we've had an ongoing strengthening and building relationship with the ministry. So welcome, Kim, please.
Thank you. Oh. Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you, University of Saskatchewan, Dr. Mela at the center. Thank you for inviting us to bring these greetings on behalf of the provincial government, the Ministry of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety, and of course, the Research and Implementation Branch. I've got the honor of being the Executive Director of the Research and Implementation Branch for a little under a year now. And it's my privilege to be able to foster the relationship that we have with the center through the University of Saskatchewan. We have a collaborative research agreement with the university, and that's through the center, and it's through a real collaborative process that we can engage in really important work to improve the lives of people that are connected to the criminal justice system. The center has been paramount in getting a lot of work forward, moving things across the line and helping us bring new and innovative ways that we can look at improving lives across the system. The branch has the unique opportunity also to work with the Ministry of Social Services as well as Justice. So we get to see a little bit of that cross-systems approach and drive what we can to improve everything going forward. So the work we do is instrumental in making new achievements across the system and breaking down barriers as well. So great thanks to the center. Thank you for allowing us to bring greetings, and we're very much looking forward to the speakers that you've got here, as well as looking forward to the questions that are brought forward to the panel. Looking forward to more work in the future as we go forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Kim. The Forensic Center is guided by an oversight committee called the Advisory Committee, and Kim sits on that committee, and so does Kathy Neal, who I'm going to call on behalf of Jason Hope, the Deputy Commissioner of Correctional Services of Canada in the Prairies. Please welcome Kathy.
Good afternoon. Happy to be here. My name is Kathy Neal. I'm a member of the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, as well as the Deputy Commissioner for Indigenous Corrections for the Correctional Service of Canada. I just want to start also by thanking Elder Penny for her sharing of her story today. Very powerful story in the little snippet that she gave us, and just to acknowledge the courage it actually takes for her to get up here and share that story. It really, to me, it's terrifying, and I haven't reached that level of sharing in my own personal history. And so I just really want to acknowledge her strength and courage in terms of sharing that with her. So kudos to her. Also to acknowledge the land that we're on here today is Treaty 6 and homeland of the Métis. As with Dr. Mela, my goal is to use my voice to influence Correctional Service of Canada, both in their policies, programs, and process development. I feel humbled in terms of being able to have that position and really that influence within the corrections to see change and affect change. I started in corrections as a casual correctional officer in 1996, and so had limited experience at that time and limited influence. And so just really feel privileged to be able to see the impact that we can make today in terms of that position. Also bring regrets from Jason Hope, the Regional Deputy Commissioner of the Prairie Region. He did want to be here today, but unfortunately something came up, and so was called away for that. And finally, do want to thank all of the organizers today and Dr. Mela for putting this event together. It is an important discussion. The population of women in our care at this point is our fastest growing population. Not something anybody is proud of, but definitely something that is worth talking about and collaborating with partners with regards to that. So I'm very proud of the relationship between CSC and the partners at the university. Our partnership goes back to the founding of the Regional Psychiatric Center, which was in 1978. For those of you who don't know, the Psychiatric Center is a federal correction psychiatric center which treats both male and female residents. It's the only federal correctional psychiatric center that does allow female admissions to it. In the decades since the opening of RPC has brought together public sector, academia, and criminal justice communities. It's a place to learn, to research, and to contribute to public safety through some of the innovative work that's done there. We at CSC are very proud to participate in learning events such as the biannual Violence and Aggression Symposium and collaborate on projects undertaken at the Center for Forensic Behavioral Science and Justice Studies, such as the predictability screening tool for the assessment of and diagnosis of older persons in custody. It was a large endeavor and probably one of the first research projects that had direct interviews with such a broad candidate pool. So the majority of our residents age 55 and over all participated. Those who were willing to consent participated in an interview to give feedback. And as a result, there was a national strategy created to address some of their direct feedback in relation to that. There's also the evaluation of the Okemauchi Healing Lodge Traditional Healer Medicine Program, wherein we are attempting to integrate traditional medicine with Western medicine. It's the first of the kind within Correctional Service of Canada, which we are looking to expand in based on some of the work that has been done in relation to that. And finally, a lit review related to supporting the adherence to medication in correctional settings. These are just a few numbers of the projects that we've partnered together on and look forward to future collaboration in a variety of areas. RPC's work is guided by a patient-first principle, and we seek out partnerships and innovative ways to deliver effective programs tailored to their needs. Since most incarcerated persons will return to communities, we offer people under jurisdiction opportunities to get ready for a safe, successful reintegration back into the community. Recognize the importance of maintaining family ties as a means to assist in safe reintegration. Also, the special needs of women in our system. And so the theme of today's discussions, improving lives of mothers in prison, is certainly a key component to our work. I feel it's also important to mention that in many Indigenous cultures, women hold a central and revered role, often acting as the backbone of their communities, responsible for maintaining cultural traditions, sharing knowledge, and fostering community well-being. There are grandmothers, and they often serve as leaders, healers, and keepers of sacred knowledge. And so they are essential for the health and the future of our generations. CSC's Mother-Child program is meant to foster positive relationships between mothers and their children and to assist in the rehabilitation and successful reintegration of women offenders. The best interest of the child is paramount in all of the decisions related to the Mother-Child program. This program is available in all mainstream women's institutions, as well as the Okemauchi Healing Lodge, and has expanded to be present in our Section 81 partner facility, women's facilities. CSC strives to be a learning organization, whether it be through health accreditation program, the research department activities, or investigations and lessons learned. We incorporate input from our numerous partners in the criminal justice system, research, government communities to deliver the best care that we can to the people under our care. Appreciate every opportunity given to us to meet, discuss, and learn from partners to help us manage emerging needs and support the patients working to achieve a safe and successful reintegration. And I look forward to the exchange of information today, as I'm sure we are all working towards the best possible outcomes for the people that we are providing services to. Thanks.
Thanks, Kathy. And I can say confidently that today's topic probably started rolling from Kathy's desk. She called me and said, Mansfield, you know, we've been collecting data on women and child for 20 years. I said, yes. What can you do? We got a postdoc, Dr. Tetros. She did some systematic review, and then she said, wow, do you know there's one Dr. Painter? She's the one that's written most about this. We better contact her. And that's why we're here today. So thanks, Kathy, who also sits on our advisory. By the way, I just really want to recognize some of our students who have been helping us. You see them around, supporting and guiding, and you see them also during the refreshment. So we will now get into our speakers' conversation. Again, the topic that Professor Painter is going to talk about is reproductive health and the prison system in Canada. Dr. Painter has worked to advance abortion access in Canada for over 20 years. She's a writer, a nurse, a public scholar. She is recognized internationally for the expertise of the nexus of reproductive and prisoner health. She's an assistant professor at the University of New Brunswick Faculty of Nursing, director of nursing research for the Contraception and Abortion Research Team, a national network based out of the UBC Faculty of Medicine, affiliate scientist for the Reproductive Options and Services, abortion clinic at the Nova Scotia Health, a member of the Dalhousie University Health Law and Justice Institute, and founder and past chair of Wellness Within, an organization for health and justice, the only non-profit in Canada dedicated to advancing reproductive justice for people in prison. In 2022, Professor Painter completed released our first book known as Abortion to Abolition. Our second book, Lawless, was also released in 2025. She has published over 50 peer-reviewed articles and participated in 250 news interviews with the media. She received the sesquicentennial 150th anniversary medal from the Senate of Canada for our volunteer service to the country. Dr. Painter, you're welcome to Saskatoon again, and please, we will all hear you. Please put your hands together for her.
What about now? We're good? Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the invite to be here. And let me see how we make this happen. What do you think? Oh, sorry. Okay, maybe I just have to scroll through. That's okay. Yeah, it's okay. I can just go like this. Yeah. Okay. I wish to begin by acknowledging that I am a white, queer, cis woman settler living and working on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Wolastoqey people in Fredericton. And I want to acknowledge the ongoing genocide against Indigenous people in Canada. Today in particular, I honor and mourn Morgan Harris and Mercedes Myron, who were finally found this month at Prairie Green landfill outside of Winnipeg. Incarceration contributes to cultural genocide. And as Kathy has already said, Indigenous women are the most hyper-incarcerated people in the country, with over 50% of women in federal prison identifying as Indigenous. And Elder Pelly spoke to this, but the 2015 Truth and Reconciliation Commission called for an end to the over-incarceration of Indigenous people as a requirement for justice. And yet, in the 10 years now since the TRC's calls, the number of incarcerated Indigenous people has only increased. We're doing something wrong. I came to this work, as Mansfield was speaking about in that introduction. I came to this work from the perspective of grassroots organizing, volunteer service, and scholarship now. In 2012, we founded Wellness Within, which started as a doula organization, a doula, it started as a program, really, a doula program. And it has really expanded to have a mandate very focused on advocacy and on research, as well as education. I want to honor Julie Belota, as her experiences greatly influenced my own path. And she became and remains a friend. Is everybody familiar with Julie's story? Okay. So Julie, in 2012, she was pregnant, 8 months pregnant, and she was remanded to the Ottawa Carleton Detention Center. Sure, everybody here knows what remand is, but she was held pre-trial. And it was her first pregnancy. She was in her 20s, she was young. And she went into labor, and she was sent to segregation because her cries of pain were so disruptive to the institution. She was left alone all day. No midwife or physician was called to attend to her. She labored unmedicated and unattended all day long. And when a little foot was seen protruding from her vulva, a correctional officer accused her of shoving contraband up herself. When both legs were fully protruding from her vulva, they decided to call the medics. So her son, Gianni Garlo, was born in a jail cell in this nation, which is supposedly quite a developed nation, in this nation's capital. So that was 2012. And at the time, I was doing a lot of work in abortion, a lot of work in birth justice. And we realized that, Julie's story was on CBC, and we realized that we had no idea, doing all this work in reproductive justice, we didn't know anything about what was happening in the jail, which is in Dartmouth, like across the water from Halifax. And so that was why we started Wellness Within, to try to bring our doula program into the jail. And it took about 2 years to get clearance, and then we were in. And every person who's been provincially incarcerated in Nova Scotia since has been offered doula services. And of course, a doula for a person who's prison, it's very different than it might be in the community. There's no water baths, and it's not so much about back massage. It's very much about attending court, just bearing witness, being present, being someone who is unconditionally behind that person. So that's Julie. My clinical practice as a nurse has focused entirely on maternity and abortion care. I work bedside in these fields at the IWK Health Center, which is a tertiary maternity and pediatric center in Halifax that serves the Atlantic region. and the Rose Clinic, the Reproductive Options and Services Clinic, which is the main abortion clinic for Nova Scotia. So I now live in New Brunswick, and now I have a scientific appointment with the clinic and with the IWK. And as Mansfield said, I work in really close collaboration with this group called the Contraception and Abortion Research Team. We're spread out across the country and are extremely dedicated to advancing family planning research and access to reproductive health services. And we are benefiting still from very generous funding from the Trudeau Liberals. My work is informed by two Black feminist philosophies, reproductive justice, which is the theory, the praxis that not only should we be working so that everybody has the right to not have a child, but that they have the right to have a child and to parent that child in safety. Prison abolition movement looks for alternatives to prisons, creative solutions that are safer for individuals, safer for families, and more evidence-based in terms of improving health and social harm. So my scholarship has come to focus really in these two areas, and it's culminated in two books. This one, and I did bring a couple, it looks back on that realization I had as someone who was very involved in the abortion movement since my teens, that we need to recognize our incredible privilege in Canada as the only jurisdiction in the entire world which has complete decriminalization of abortion. We've made unparalleled strides in terms of access. We need to know about that. Everybody needs to know about that. And then we need to take all that energy that we successfully have applied into this space and put it into those areas of reproductive justice that we have so much more work to do in. And of course, one of those areas is parenting for people who are in prison. Lawless explains that unique context of abortion in Canada. We do not have an abortion law, but we do have a web of regulations and legislation that support our access. And that book will be out in September. And I hope to be back for the Custody and Care Conference in the fall, when that book will be available. I work with an artist from Halifax named Julia Hutt. I spend a lot of time going into prisons to present, and these are spaces where I want to bring beauty. And so I'm really dedicated to working with artists to have, frankly, just nice materials to bring inside. And this is a portrait that Julia created in collaboration with Santina Rao, who is an activist in Halifax against police brutality. Okay, so when we bring that reproductive justice lens to the prison apparatus, we can see clearly the sexed and gendered implications of this system. Prison is a gendered experience. Incarceration has clear implications on the right not to have children, the right to have children, and to parent in safety. These include barriers to sexual and reproductive health care, strip searching, gender-based violence, use of force, restraints, sexual assault, delays and disruptions to fertility, and dissolution of the family. In Canada, women are the fastest growing population in prisons and are yet a tiny minority. There are approximately 700 women or gender diverse people in prisons designated for women on a given day. So that's really not that many people. There are about 2,000 plus in provincial systems on a given day. In the provincial system, over 2/3 of people are remanded. So most of the women are in the provincial system. Most of these women are remanded. And again, I will continue to use this language of women because that's the language the stats are available in. We all know that in a gendered system like prisons, there will be gender diverse people in both sides of that gendered house. The average length of stay in a provincial prison is about a week. So it's enough time to really ruin your life. And that's about it. I already introduced the issues of racism and hyper-incarceration, and that over 50% of women in federal prison are Indigenous. They're also incarcerated at earlier ages, and they're classed at higher security levels. And this has really significant impact because it restricts your access to programming, to visitation, employment. And let's be frank, it's taking away more of your reproductive years. Okay, when we're talking about a genocide, a reprocide, your denial of reproduction, this is part of it. We lack data, but we know, those of us who go into prisons, we can see it clear as day that we are hyper incarcerating Black people, brown people, newcomers to Canada, queer community, and people with disabilities. We just don't have good data. Women and gender diverse people are arriving at the prison with complex health histories that really affect sexual and reproductive health. Okay, so as Elder Pelly was speaking about, most of this population have experienced not just sexual and physical abuse, childhood sexual and physical abuse. 1/3 have experienced traumatic brain injury, right? How are they getting those TBIs? Well, violence, or substance use and opioid poisoning, hypoxia. As a result of this childhood trauma, you see extremely high rates of mental illness, extremely high rates of substance use, and around it goes. So there's very high needs for care, in short. And then there's the prison context. So once you're in the prison environment, there are further complications to reproductive health. Prisons are generally less hygienic spaces. There's less nutrition, certainly less choice over nutrition, lack of exercise, lack of access to basic comforts. You're simultaneously in this position where you are never alone and always under surveillance, and yet feel completely isolated. You're very vulnerable to violence of all types, and you lack access to information. Very clear structural barriers to using the internet and the phone, which is how we Google everything we want to know about our health. And you also don't have very much control over access to over-the-counter meds. So that's just the basics and how that would affect your feelings of bodily autonomy that are so important as preconditions to experiencing reproductive justice. Further care in prison, despite federal and provincial legislation requiring it to meet professional standards, is the #1 cause of prisoner complaints to the Office of the Correctional Investigator. In my research, we have found that mental health and substance use really crowd out the other concerns, right? And it's not just the staff that are really focused on mental health and substance use and the treatment for those. It's the people themselves. Those are such acute, Elder Pelly also spoke about Maslow. These are just such acute things to be able to function until noon. That things like whether or not you have your contraception of choice is very, very far down the line. We have also found that this correctional officer triage of requests for care, resulting in confidentiality violations between workforces. Prisoners report judgment and coercion from nursing staff who should definitely be treating them with compassion and dignity. They experience a lot of opacity in terms of they don't get to know what they don't get to know, right? So you don't know that you had an appointment booked today, and then you don't know that it was canceled, and then you don't know that the nurses at the maternity unit are questioning your commitment to parenting because you don't show up for your prenatal appointment. Medical escort practices are dehumanizing and often, frankly, dangerous. It is a false risk to be walking around shackled, to have your hands bound. There's a lack of emergency care, often nursing units, especially in some of the smaller provincial facilities. You're lucky if you have 1 LPN from 0700 to 1500. And then when released, of course, there's significant issues with continuity of care. This is just a a quote from one of our interviews. I had to undress while they were standing outside watching me and stand there half naked getting these x-rays done. While there's another officer just behind the partition expecting me to run. Where am I going to go? Canada has signed on to the United Nations International Minimum Standards for the Treatment of Prisoners, known as the Mandela Rules, and these insist on our obligations as healthcare providers to treat patients who are inside the exact same as we would treat any patient. There's also a requirement that pregnancy be carefully accommodated, and we just do not see that happen. While there's been very little research, honestly, about pregnancy in prison, we do have a little bit, mostly based on, of course, my work, but also population-based data out of Ontario. So we do know that ever incarcerated is associated with an increased risk of preterm delivery, and prematurity is the #1 cause of infant death in Canada. So ever incarcerated, not just in this pregnancy you're incarcerated, if you ever were in the past, you have an increased risk of these outcomes. We also know that people who are in prison have inadequate access to prenatal care. They're not getting our recommended standard, you know, you come every month for this, you get your diabetes test at this point, you get your blah, 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 right? And we're also seeing decreased access to OBGYN care. Oftentimes it's family physicians who come in for 2 hours a week to prisons. And in the UK, any prison pregnancy is classified as high risk and requiring obstetrical surveillance. This is definitely not the case in Canada, right? In fact, we have no position statements from any professional group in the area of sexual and reproductive health care asserting our obligations as sexual and reproductive healthcare providers to this population. Most alarmingly, care is experienced as an opportunity for violence. There's just a lot of disrespect for inmates in the system anyways, and so when you throw in healthcare, it's just another way to disrespect you, to deny you service, to violate your privacy, to physically hurt you. This is how it's experienced as a weapon. And of course, I'm sure we're all familiar with the use of medical segregation. If you express suicidality or mental health concerns of other types, you can end up in further segregation as a consequence of your asking for help. So in Canada, we have 6 federal prisons designated for women. Each of these prisons has, in theory, a mother-child program, as Kathy explained. The federal program was established in 2000 as a response to Creating Choices, the 1996 report from the task force appointed to address the future of federal incarceration for women. Even at that time, there was a recognition that the number of incarcerated women was rising rapidly. Okay, so this is 30 years ago. And with harmful consequences for women and their families. The mother-child program is not a prison nursery. It is not really a program at all. It is permission for individual mothers to keep their children behind bars with them in a slightly larger cell until the child reaches kindergarten age. Custody of a mother costs the state $250,000 a year. To qualify for the program, mothers must be classified as medium and minimum. Depends on the institution where you can actually end up. There are space limitations. There must not have convictions involving harm to a child. And there must be another prisoner willing and able to serve as backup inside, as well as an external person who, within a half hour, could arrive at the prison to assume guardianship of the child in an emergency. In the past 20 years, only about 150 mothers have ever participated in the program. The children are not counted. So, for example, you could enter the program at 2 months pregnant, have the baby at full term, have the baby taken away from you at the breast at birth to go into foster care, and that would count as somebody participating in the mother-child program for 7 months. There is no data on how many federally incarcerated women are pregnant, give birth, or have children, nor for that matter do data exist regarding abortions, miscarriages, access to prenatal or postpartum care, etc. These things are not counted. Of the 150 people to have ever joined the program, we do not know how many applied and were rejected. How many actually had children with them behind bars versus being pregnant. And having provided doula support for almost a decade at the Nova Institution for Women Federal Prison, I have witnessed fewer than 1 child per year join the program. Over 10 years of community work and research has caused me to feel only trepidation towards the mother-child program. It sounds like a very good idea. We know the evidence of harm when children do not spend the early days and months skin to skin, breastfeeding, bonding, and developing strong, healthy attachments. But I have found that the mother-child program serves to sanitize the federal prison system, making it sound benign, even generous, with potentially deeply damaging impacts. Why do so few people qualify? The eligibility criteria are in practice too hard to actualize. Security classification, whether you are classed as minimum, medium, or maximum, depends on an algorithm of both static and dynamic factors. Static factors are things you cannot change. And your history of trauma, the very thing that would indicate you need support and care, is interpreted as a threat to institutional security. Over 80% of women in prison have childhood histories of sexual molestation and physical abuse. They have trauma that won't ever leave them. And Indigenous women, survivors of the genocidal residential school regime, the 60s scoop that saw Indigenous children removed from their homes and communities and dislocated to white households, are disproportionately likely to have that static trauma factor. Imprisoned serves to continue a repricidal process of removing Indigenous children from their families, communities, and culture. Very few prisoners have a close family member or friend in the immediate vicinity of a prison who can serve as that required backup. There are only 6 prisons for women in the 2nd largest country in terms of landmass in the world. The distances between prisoners and their homes are vast. Indigenous women are, of course, more likely to come from remote settings and to experience abject poverty. They are disproportionately unlikely to have a family member living nearby or who has the resources to just uproot themselves and move nearby. The requirement for a peer babysitter sounds prudent. Someone to watch over your baby while you attend AA or a healthcare appointment. But the babysitter must also have that limited security classification. And your dependence on her is extreme. If she even once gets into an altercation, even one not of her initiation, and is sent to segregation or has her classification reassessed, you lose your place in the program. Your baby is removed. My research has shown participants in the MCP are disproportionately non-Indigenous. We have to consider how this largely inaccessible program ends up being reproductive coercion. If you foresee not being able to be with your baby and choose to terminate your pregnancy, was that a choice? So most mothers obviously are ineligible for the program. And this is a quote from a woman I interviewed who was separated from her baby. It's very emotional and you're lonely, and especially for a young mom that all she knows is her kid 24/7 and being home with her family. It was definitely a hard adjustment. I had no contact with anybody, like any friends at all. So for a young woman, my first federal offense ever, being federally sentenced, it was definitely a terror. It was lonely, it was scary, it was depressing, traumatic. It was probably the scariest time of my life. She had not been one night without her baby. Finally, my research has found mothers often feel reluctant to even apply for the program. Participants must be approved not only by the federal prison warden, but by the provincial child welfare department. Once in the program, it is not only their bodies and actions, but their very motherhood that is under surveillance. Mothers will be yelled at by correctional officers for their babies crying. They will be accused of neglect for not having access to diapers or formula. And because this is not a nursery setting, they can never get a break. And if they lose their temper even once, child welfare can be called. And this was a woman who did participate in the program, and oh my God, she was grateful that she did. And her husband moved to, down the street from wherever they lived, which I won't tell you. And he brought her things literally every day. And her baby stayed with her until they aged out of the program, and then they came to visit on the weekends. She had a life sentence. When the officers went by for the count, they'd say, "Are you going to keep your kid quiet?" "Yeah, well, listen, if my child is crying, it's for a reason. He's hungry, there's something. I'll feed him soon after the count. But are you going to shut him up because he's crying? I'm not about to shut him up. I'm not going to put my hand over his mouth to shut him up." Because there is, well, actually, I'll say one more thing about this. Because Indigenous women are more likely to have experienced involvement with the child welfare system, either as children themselves or with their existing children. They are terrified of the consequences of getting on the radar of child protection. More than 50% of children in foster care in Canada are Indigenous. The practice of removing newborns from the mother's arms in delivery wards is so widespread that it has a name: birth alerts. And Indigenous women are disproportionately victimized. So this, of course, contributes to that reluctance to even try to get into this program. Because there is no data about the children in the mother-child program, we don't even know how many there are. We don't know if the outcomes for these children are better. We don't know if these children are less or perhaps more likely to be removed from their mother's permanent custody and placed in state care. We don't know if they get their vaccines on schedule or at all. We don't know anything about their mental or physical health or educational outcomes in the long term. We must think very critically about what we are suggesting when we suggest more access to this program. When we assume expanding this program is a solution to the escalating incarceration of women. We do not have any proof that that is true. I want to share some stories from women who spoke to me about the MCP. Obviously, all these names are made up, and the stories are a little bit blended together. Aaliyah had her baby in the program. She loved having her. But as she was getting ready for her release on parole, she discovered no halfway house in the region would take a baby. Either the baby would be sent to foster care until she completed her parole, or she could forgo parole and complete her sentence behind bars with the baby. Sarah wanted to have her baby in the program. She was taking medication for opioid use disorder. Child welfare determined she was not a suitable candidate for the mother-child program. She could stay with the baby in hospital until he recovered from newborn withdrawal and was discharged, with correctional officers present around the clock. Margot had her baby in the program. There is no access to the internet while inside, and a phone call costs a fortune. The prison refuses any responsibility for the baby's health, except in extreme emergencies. When Margot was released, child welfare asked where she was going to take the baby for checkups. Margot was from another province and had no idea how to get a family doctor. She couldn't Google it, and no one would help her. Child welfare removed her baby because she was deemed too irresponsible to ensure its health and community. Lucy wanted to have her baby in the program. To qualify for parole, she had to participate in a program 5 hours each day. No one on her unit was willing to babysit that long. They'd miss out on the chance to work and make very little money, but something. Lucy sent the baby to live with her grandmother. She figures she will see her more and faster if she finishes the program and gets out on parole. And so on and so on. The very existence of the mother-child program whatever, it distracts. It seems like a good idea. Mothers pour enormous amount of hope and effort into the prospect of getting in, but barely anyone does. And those who do so are there precariously and often only briefly. We can do better. After 12 years, I guess 13 now, of working in this area and all of the advocacy of so many people across the country, it is only in recent months that Correctional Services Canada has launched an evaluation of the MCP, which is great. The evaluation is calling for past participants' reflections, but locating people and bringing them back into the traumatic memories of this time in their life is very challenging. I know this from lots of firsthand research in this area. At the very least, Canadian prisons should be required to collect and share data about the program as it is happening. What are the health outcomes? Are the babies born too early, too small? Do they get their vaccines? Do they go to preschool? We need hard, clear outcome data to prove this program is ethical, let alone beneficial. And these outcomes must be compared to outcomes associated with community-based alternatives that wrap these parent-child pairs in supports, because another way is possible. So as a last word, I'll summarize that the mother-child program eligibility is problematic and the program is unevaluated. Available evidence points to poorer outcomes for pregnant people and newborns in prison, and alternatives are imperative. Here are links to my website, my email, and I think we have like maybe a couple minutes for questions. People have them, but that's it.
If there are questions in person, I can bring the mic to you. And if there's questions online, we can read them out. Question online, Christy? I think it has to go in the
I think for Zoom, they need it.
they can't hear you.
So the one question from online is Wellness Within available to clients at the Federal Women's Institution in Truro?
So really, no. There was a period when it was available, and it's just really not anymore. Yeah.
Just as somebody who works in social services, what would you recommend if I have clients who are pregnant and handling the court system? How can I support them?
There are a couple of things. I think one of the biggest things that comes across in my research is the reality check. You're probably not going to qualify for this program, and you had better come up with a really good plan for that baby. People really, they like hope is the fuel, right? And then you are 2 days postpartum and they take the baby from you because you didn't make arrangements because you were really hoping it was going to work out. And that's probably the most common and tragic situation that I have seen with clients and people that I've interviewed. Just this, you know, importantly, in Canada, the fetus is not a person. The fetus is not a child. And we're not going to take the fetus from you from a child protection perspective until it's born. But as a result, you don't really get the truth until the baby's here. And it lands really, really hard. And then you see a lot of really serious relapse with substance use.
Thank you.
Any final questions?
I think in general, in thinking about that, we do have to reckon with the fact that peripartum depression is the #1 complication of pregnancy. So if you already have a history of mental illness, which you very likely are to have, and you have this extremely traumatic thing happen in the perinatal period, the chances of you not ending up with serious peripartum depression is, it's very unlikely. And then what's the treatment availability? It's really not there. So a bit of a spiral. All right, we can talk more later, I think. Oh, thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Ms. Fisher. Oh, I suppose I'll relinquish it.
Thank you.
All right, well, we get set up for our next presentation here. I'll do the introduction. So my name is Bryce Stoliker. I'm a research officer with the Forensic Center, and I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Robin Hansen. So Robin Hansen is an associate professor at the College of Law here at the University of Saskatchewan. An international law specialist, she teaches public international law, conflict of laws and human rights. Her primary research interest is on how legal personhood is constructed within legal systems, and particularly how this construction frames accountability. She is the author of Prison Born: Incarceration and Motherhood in the Colonial Shadow, which examines the rights of newborn children not to be automatically separated from their mothers by the state without due process. So join me in welcoming Professor Robin Hansen.
All right, I think people can hear me, hopefully. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you to the Forensic Center for the kind invitation. I have a talk today about systemic discrimination and the denial of children's rights. And I'm going to be talking about racism as a white woman. My aim is to be doing this respectfully, and I hope that comes through. There's offensive terms and ideas. But I wanted to say that at the outset. So what is systemic discrimination? This is an idea that, in the words of the Ontario Human Rights Commission, is about the systems that organizations have in place, which may be neutral on their face, but they create impacts that perpetuate and exacerbate disadvantage experienced by a historically marginalized group. A little bit more detail from the words of, as she then was, Judge Abella, later appointed to the Supreme Court, writing in 1984, the Royal Commission on Equality and Employment. The impact of behavior is the essence of systemic discrimination. It suggests that the inexorable cumulative effect on individuals and groups of behavior. It is the impact, it is the inexorable cumulative effect on individuals or groups of behavior that has an arbitrarily negative effect on them. This is more significant than whether the behavior flows from insensitivity or intentional discrimination. So implicit bias, just as important as express conscious bias in perpetuating systemic discrimination. Very powerful in creating these impacts. So I'm talking about imprisonment and babies today. There's a lot of different ways to start telling that story. I'm telling it from my perspective. This is art by Onu Guha-Takurta, a textile artist in Calgary, who has presented one way of telling the story that was the idea for the cover of the book. So from my position, I'm white. My grandparents were settler farmers in Treaty 7 territory. I'm also a mother, which is why I got into this area. I have a personal conception of what it's like to care for a child who you have felt inside of you for months before the child's birth. And I know how utterly cruel and inhumane it is to stop automatically a newborn child from having access to someone who wants nothing more than to care for them and to love them. And as a mother, I also know about the invisibility, minimization, and devaluing of care work in our society. And I know about societal judgment about who is a good mother and who is a bad mother. I know about that obviously from my position as a white woman. Intersectionality applies such that everyone gets judged as to who they are in terms of their status, in terms of their identity. The good mother, bad mother idea, however, is very potent in our society, and it's connected to another potent dichotomy, the Madonna whore dichotomy, which can also be profoundly dehumanizing in our society. So with my positionality aside, I'd like to make 2 points at the outset concerning birth and imprisonment. First, as has been alluded to, when a child is born, skin-to-skin contact with the birthing parent is recommended, breastfeeding is recommended, rooming in is recommended. Bonding and attachment is foundational to the child's physiological, emotional, and mental development. This is known. I've researched it, I've lived it, I'm not alone in this. I would say it is widely known. We can see this in the statements of the Canadian Pediatric Society. Attachment is the deep emotional bond between a baby and the person who provides most of their care. Attachment is essential to the long-term emotional health of a child. When we are automatically denying newborns access to bonding, this is an example of the science policy lag in action, where policy is dragging far beyond what we know from medical research. We don't want to set people up for risk of reactive attachment disorder, disinhibited attachment disorder, other health complications. This is the most vulnerable point in someone's life. We don't want to interfere with the development of norepinephrine. We don't want to have a permanent scarcity of dopaminergic neurons. We want there to be optimal development. That's what we need in society. That's my first point, is that a lack of due process here, an automatic denial of an available bonding parent without really thinking about access to appropriate bonding in this state decision-making, that's a deprivation. The second point is that as a legal person, we all have charter rights. And a key charter right we all have is that if a state interferes with you and your security of the person, the state can only do that in accordance with fundamental justice, which means fair process, which means if the state does something to you with zero process, that's a violation of Charter Section 7. So if we are just taking everybody away from their mothers without an individualized due process examination of the individual circumstances, we're committing a violation of the rights of that person who the rule of law says has rights under Section 7 of the Charter. So with those 2 points, we can point out to the fact that this is a Canada-wide problem, this systemic rights violation. Not a lot of information, but estimation is about 45 babies a year. For instance, in Ontario, it was 26 in a 5-year period, 7 automatic separations in Saskatchewan in that same period. And it's not rocket science. If there's around just under 3,000 people in prison and around 5% of those enter pregnant, there's going to be births. And if we're systematically denying access to due process and deciding what happens after those births, this is a Canada-wide problem. And it's also a problem related to systemic discrimination against Indigenous persons, because it's just not getting any better. We have 2020, 2021 data from Stats Canada the rate of incarceration for Indigenous persons 8.9 times the rate compared with non-Indigenous persons. And in Saskatchewan, 17.7 times higher. It boggles the mind. And this is a condemning statistic, but it's one among many. We have all the data in the world about over-incarceration. Indigenous persons are subjected to higher police scrutiny, rates of police violence, judicially imposed sentences are longer, denied bail more often, denied parole more often, more conditions upon release, rated at higher security classifications, standardized risk assessments work against them. And criminal law it can be an incredibly lopsided process here. Legal Aid Saskatchewan, it rarely, if ever, will fund an appeal initiated by an accused here. So once you're in jail, then you have expensive phone calls and no internet access, and there you are. So this is what we're seeing in the statistics. But I'm not talking about statistics today. I'm a legal academic. I'm not presenting this from lived experience either. I'm looking at this through systems theory. So children's rights are being systematically denied in incarceration decisions. Why? Well, but to figure out why, we have to look at what is the legal system, what's it doing here, and what norms is it applying? So what is the legal system? I turn to Niklas Luhmann, the German sociologist and lawyer, very prolific and influential social theorist from the 20th century. What is law? Law for Luhmann is a series of communication concerning what is coded as legal and what is coded as illegal. In systems theory, the legal system is operating such that when there are communicated expectations of what is legal that match among system actors, those matching expectations actually form the legal system in that instance. So the legal system is being continually reformed. And yes, there's reference to legislation and other sources, but when we're looking at the operation and the form of the law, we are looking at how it is being expected to function in a given instance. So law is being continually coded in its operations. Silence is acquiescence to these communicated expectations. And it is thus a self-replicating network of communicated expectations of what it's expected to be. That is law. That's law. What's the system doing in this instance? Well, what's happening in this instance is that in a non-remand scenario, so let's look at sentence custody, what's the system doing? What's happening is that the judge is making a determination in the system that a given custodial sentence is warranted. And at the same time, that judge is also determining, looking at this pregnant person in the courtroom, knowing there's no place for their baby in the jail, and making a second implicit determination that that woman's status is such and the status of the coming child is such that it is also legal in the system for that child's future rights to be preemptively denied to that child. That's what's happening here. It's a twofold determination in the decision to incarcerate someone. And then when corrections does separate the dyad at birth, they're following through on this order and also failing to acknowledge the human rights of the child. So silence to reject that communicated expectation on their part allows that communicated expectation to ripple through the system. The communicated expectation that that child is a different type of person that doesn't get their full charter rights just because of who their mother is. So we've looked at what the system is, we looked at how it's operating. What norms are being applied by the system when it creates systemic discrimination? And so remember, Luhmann sees the legal system as human-made. It's essentially amoral. It's not inherently connected to a moral order. It's what we humans create it as, what we designate as legal and illegal. So if it's the expected content of the system that matters, expectations of what's legal and not legal, whose expectations created the Canadian legal system? The British and Canadian authorities. And this legal system was expected to facilitate the development of Canada as a colony with the dispossession and containment of Indigenous persons, not a controversial statement made by a foreign power in an area where there were people living here first. So we go back to the question, what norms are being communicated in the legal system when it's perpetuating and exacerbating systemic discrimination? In other words, when it's perpetuating the system's over-incarceration of Indigenous persons and the system's automatic newborn separation. Anti-Indigenous norms are clearly operating in the system. How do we identify them and root them out? We go back, first of all, to rejecting the idea of terra nullius, which is like this insidious root that is poisoning so much of our legal system's operation. Terra nullius is a public international Western European concept. I'm an international law scholar. It's not just Canada that has been treated like this, but it is a concept that says this land is open for sovereignty, with the subtext that it's empty, because the subtext is that Indigenous peoples don't count as full people in this legal doctrine. They're not full people because in this doctrine, they're uncivilized or they're dying and disappearing anyway. That's why we see British Columbia as being regarded as certain wild and unoccupied territories. So is it true that terra nullius is that insidious in our legal system? Yes, it is, because if we look into understanding the conception of Saskatchewan, one very prominent idea is simply that it's the result of Charles II giving land to the Hudson's Bay Company, which then the Crown buys back, which then legislation is passed to create the Saskatchewan. There's zero respect offered towards Indigenous peoples as peoples in this conception of Canadian law. And it's that same reasoning that underpins the legitimacy of the British North America Act, Section 91, Sub 24, and also all of the Indian Acts. So it has to be acknowledged and rejected. We have to instead focus on treaties and modern arrangements that don't have this rotten base. And we have to focus also on Section 35 and on the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Persons, and all the ways that the legal system can respectfully include and engender Indigenous legal jurisdiction. Because what happens if terra nullius is validated in the system's content and it gets communicated? We have the racist legal doctrine that then supports in the legal system, in the system's determination of what's legal and illegal. Terra nullius supports discriminatory system norms itself, devaluing labels that lead to this extreme systemic discrimination. So if the idea is that Saskatchewan is terra nullius, then the idea in the system is that Indigenous persons are uncivilized, so they're perpetual threats, and or that they're disappearing and dying already. And this is all, many other scholars have talked about these labels and myths. And then if we have these labels being communicated in the legal system, then the bias that we see is the impact of the legal system on Indigenous peoples, which is that it overpunishes them and overcontrols them, legitimates violence, that it underprotects them, so legitimating violence and neglect, because once someone is declared to be a threat, then violence is legitimated in the system. Once someone is labeled as being deficient and just a write-off, disappearing and dying, then neglect is legitimated by the system. So these labels are extremely problematic. And they have a couple of subsets. Uncivilized labeling leads to the legal system having legitimated system actions of profiling, police and custody violence without accountability, over-incarceration, sanctioning the Castle Doctrine, and just these examples of a grandfather and a 12-year-old being handcuffed outside a bank, and very, very ready, dehumanizing labels being circulated in the legal system connected to problematic legal rules. Same sort of labels for a dying person, that they're drunk, or write them off as a sex worker or someone with, it was a drug user. And then if they're labeled that way, then the system treats them in a way that doesn't give them full personhood. And then the system doesn't investigate when they go missing, or report violence, or fails to ensure protection. Or then there's active neglect or misdiagnosis of health conditions by authorities. And then there's situations like the freezing deaths, all the abuse and illness in the Indian residential school system, not investigating Vancouver East Side, just the systemic discrimination. So with these discriminatory norms connected to the foundations of Canadian law and Canadian national identity, it's perhaps not surprising that we've seen such extreme inertia and defensiveness among the system, its actors, the communications on the issue of over-incarceration. Because we've known about over-incarceration since the 80s. There's writing from 1981 on this. Parliament passed laws to address this in 1995, but there's not been a change. And the reason it hasn't been a change is because it cuts both ways. The civilized versus uncivilized binary not only diminishes people's personhood, but it elevates other people's personhood, which means that people have to let go of the idea that they are entitled to automatic virtue and impunity in the system, labels like being hardworking and respectable, that there's a clinging to the system that also needs to let go in order for there to be more humanization in the legal system. So I submit that the legal system is operating to perpetuate systemic discrimination because of foundational legal doctrine, particularly terra nullius, but it's also connected to all of the discriminatory statute and policy that has been part of Canadian law vis-a-vis Indigenous persons since the beginning of Canada. And so very briefly, all of the Indigenous specific criminal offenses and offenses under the Indian Act, the use of the pass system, alcohol rules, Indian prostitution, people being incarcerated, charged with riotous conduct in groups of 3 or more, incarcerated for not sending children to the Indian residential school, incarceration for cultural ceremonies. That was part of Canadian law. And that didn't just evaporate with official changes. The expectations that the law was supposed to be used to coerce and to incarcerate have to be rejected for them not to be part of the circulating expectations. And so official changes like in 1970 in Dry Bones, striking down the differential criminal offenses relating to alcohol, that hasn't translated to equal treatment. So let's go back to automatic separation. What are the norms here? What's happening when the judge is doing this? The mother is being treated as uncivilized. She's unworthy. She's a bad mother. She's a non-mother. And so in my client who made me this in 2016, in her looking over her transcripts, her sentencing transcripts, because I was just involved on the appeal, the pregnancy was regarded as a neutral factor. So completely irrelevant to the decision to incarcerate, apparently. So the mother is treated in a dehumanized fashion in the court. The child is also treated in a dehumanized fashion. Maybe the child will suffer this lack of bonding. Who knows what's going to happen? Children do get sent to group homes at birth with revolving caregivers. So anyway, the child may suffer, but the child is already kind of a write-off anyway, already kind of dying. This is the subtext. We're not going to take the child's rights seriously because, you know, it's less than in the communicated view of the legal system. And so a quote from her sentencing, well, in her culture, is it a negative thing to be raised by a grandparent? Thinking of, do we really need an Indigenous mother there? And the third point on the norms being perpetuated by the system that have to be rejected when it comes to sending pregnant people to jail is that Canada is forever civilized and innocent. So that's why Gladue factors have not ended over incarceration, because we just can't let go of this idea that Canada is forever civilized and innocent, and we as settlers are always innocent and civilized as well. So a quote from the sentencing. And as I pointed out, because there's all this information about all the dislocation she experienced with family members going to residential schools, and although there is intergenerational issues, and those continued with her, those resources allowed her to obtain her post-secondary education. That was how the judge totally disregarded any sort of Gladue factors in the decision to incarcerate someone who was 6 months pregnant. So she had done a couple of college classes. This means that she is entirely unscathed by Canadian colonialism. Or the other version of that is Canada's paid enough. It's not that there was any information before the court about Canada providing funding. This is fully just an assumption being made in the court. So those are what we have to just acknowledge and reject: the overarching perpetual innocence of Canada in incarceration, the idea that people are write-offs because of who they are, and the idea that they're uncivilized because of who they are. Everyone is a person in Canada. Everyone has charter rights. And we need to reject the terra nullius assumptions. We need to reject the presumed worthlessness of a mother to her coming child. We need insistence that the child is entitled to rights under Section 7 of the Charter, to fair process, to security of the person, also freedom from discrimination, human rights to health and to family. There's an obligation on Canada under the Convention on the Rights of the Child at Article 3. In all decisions affecting children, the best interests of the child must be considered by the state. And according to the presumption of compliance, the statutory presumption of compliance, in sentencing, in corrections administration, we have to be doing that. We have an obligation to consider the rights of the child as state actors, since Canada has ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that has to be followed through upon by corrections and in courts and in all decisions to incarcerate. So improving the lives of mothers in prison, we need to reject anti-Indigenous bias from the legal system at all of those nexus points. And there should be presumably far fewer Indigenous mothers in prison. Saskatchewan, maybe even 17.6 times less. So there's an obligation on Canada in sending someone to prison to consider the rights of the best interests of the child in the decision to incarcerate. That has to happen. And if the child is born during incarceration, this upstream solution is not, doesn't take effect, then you have to officially make space in the system, in the correction system, for considering the child's charter rights at birth and their interests. And this can mean making a literal space for the child to receive a birthing parent's care, because blanket automatic separation by corrections is not a respectful policy towards the human rights of children born to incarcerated persons. So this is expounded upon in the book. And I didn't even check my clock. I think I'm probably, you know, I mean, that's all I've got. So regardless of time, thank you very much. Oh, it's perfect. I've got a couple minutes for questions. Should people have questions?
Questions? Yep.
So Robin, I imagine counterpoint to this is like, for instance, with the mother-child program, we do consider the best interests of the child. We do have this child welfare examination before the participation in the mother-child program is approved. So where we have supposed evidence of considering UNCRC, what's happening there? What can be our counterpoint to that?
So that idea is that we're already considering the best interest of the child. Well, we just have to make sure we're not doing that in a way that is using this colonial lens of we're assuming that the mother is less than, we're assuming that the child is less than, and this is the best that they're entitled to. So maybe we just have to change the benchmarks so that they're different benchmarks than we've been using, because the benchmarks we've been using are not humanizing.
Any other questions?
Has there been case law or from your opinion in terms of giving an unborn child legal standing in like sentencing principles in the criminal code?
So the United Kingdom, since 2024, considers pregnancy or young children a mitigating factor in sentencing. So it's not framed as the rights of the unborn child, it's framed as a mitigating factor. It's the same sort of situation. If you get damaged in utero, once you're born, you can sue in tort for the person that damaged you. So it's a future rights situation. And so in terms of precedent, the UK approach stands out as what I would point to.
Any other questions in person or online? Anything going through the chat? No. Going once, going twice. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Professor Hansen.
Well, thank you, everyone. We're going to have a few minutes break. We really have some good timing. I think we've caught up. So I believe it's 10 minutes or 15 minutes. 15 minutes for a break. We have some refreshments outside. Please do come back. Don't go away, because we're going to have a very interesting panel. Our two speakers are going to be out there, and Kathy Neal is going to join them. As you can imagine, we've talked about some of the challenges, some of the difficulties, and we have to start to think about solutions. What do we do, right? Like, how do we move forward? Already we've had some ideas from the legal side, and we need to think about us in this room from a research perspective, from our advocacy, from the roles that we play as a university. What can we do to improve the lives of women in prison if it's the last option that they are in there? So if we can take a stretch break and be back by 3 o'clock, that will be very much appreciated. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So we're going to resume our public forum and move into our panel discussion. So my name's Dr. Lisa Jewell, and I'm a research associate at the Center for Forensic Behavioral Science and Justice Studies, and I'll be the moderator of the panel discussion. So our panel will consist of Kathy Neal, who is the Deputy Commissioner of Indigenous Corrections at Correctional Service Canada, as well as our two keynote speakers, Dr. Martha Painter and Professor Robin Hansen. So during the panel sessions, our panelists will respond to some questions that we had prepared in advance. They'll each speak to 2 questions. And given the short amount of time we have for the panel, we're not going to be taking questions from the audience during this particular session. We'll just be focusing on the responses that they prepared to the questions in advance. Speakers will have about 5 minutes to respond to each question. And before we jump into the panel, I'm just going to more formally introduce Kathy. As we already heard about Martha and Robin, but not as much about Kathy. So Kathy Neal is a proud Métis descendant whose ancestors originated from the Red River, Manitoba area. On May 1st, 2023, Ms. Neal was appointed as the first Deputy Commissioner for Indigenous Corrections. Kathy holds a BA with a major in Indigenous Studies and Sociology from the University of Saskatchewan. She has 27 years of experience in the field of corrections, holding many positions, including mental health facilitator, community health worker, warden, and assistant deputy commissioner of correctional operations. She has firsthand experience working directly with federally incarcerated Indigenous peoples and has a deep commitment to fostering reconciliation, cultural awareness, and equitable treatment for Indigenous peoples in the criminal justice system. As a trailblazer in her field, she has been instrumental in shaping policies that recognize and address Indigenous needs and ensure interventions are culturally responsive. She has strong ties to her community and believes that positive relationships are key to assisting and supporting inmates on their rehabilitation journey. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. Okay, so our first question, which is going to be directed first towards Kathy and then Martha, is how do prison conditions such as overcrowding, nutrition, and hygiene affect maternal mental health?
Okay, I think it's on. You know what? I think I'll start just by putting some context in terms of the conversation today, and just to ensure we're all aware, we're all on the same side. You know, we're all working towards the same thing. CSC and myself absolutely recognize the value of child-mother bond and the importance of it early on in a child's life. Working with the women, and I mean, I've worked in the institution and I've worked in the policy and the programs. Some of the women can be some of the most challenging clients that you work with. They can also be some of the most rewarding experience you have in terms of outcomes. And so we really are working with that dichotomy and trying to balance that and you know what, shifting responses to situations to be able to be as supportive and empowering, and you know what, for that person to be as successful as possible. All of our experiences, whether it be somebody who is incarcerated, somebody who's working with somebody who's incarcerated, or just somebody who knows somebody who is incarcerated, we come to the table with those different lived experiences, and they inform how we respond to things within the institutions and those situations. In relation to, again, the nutrition, hygiene, social supports, and housing, whether it be housing in the community or overcrowding in an institution, I mean, I think all of those factors affect somebody's prenatal, postnatal health. And again, learning today that even the fact that you were ever incarcerated and not that you're incarcerated at the time of being pregnant has an impact on those things. And, you know, just to be very cognizant of that. The other thing, and again, I think it was referenced today, whether it be Maslow's hierarchy of needs and just that need to meet those basic needs becomes that predominant factor, and that is still a predominant factor in the institutions, to be able to try and find a way for them to meet those basic needs of love and belonging and pride of who they are. And you know what, even to instill some confidence to be able to ask for some of those services and advocate for some of those things within the institution when some of those accesses to internet and just searching for it are beyond your control. So we do have some resources within the institution. We do have a coordinator for the Child Mother Program in each of the locations. We have also expanded to be implemented this year to have patient advocates across Canada. So that's a new implementation just coming out. There is also a reorganization of healthcare around patient-centered home. I probably have the wrong language. I'm not directly in health, but really with the intent of having that care team around that patient with the most responsible physician. And for our higher needs patients in the psychiatric centers and in the intermediate care units, to ensure that they have a regularly scheduled case conference at different time periods depending on the identified mental health needs. So, I mean, again, all of those factors can, and you know what, just the fact that somebody is incarcerated introduces additional stress and anxiety, just the fact of incarceration. So similar to somebody who is vulnerable in the community, but recognizing that those factors contribute probably on an elevated scale when you're also incarcerated.
Thank you, Kathy. One of the things that I think about is how we're not necessarily starting with the prison as the problem, right? So, and I did talk about this, how people are arriving at the prison doors with all of this disproportionate health need. And when we say like, this is the situation, I did a study this year that was a sexual and reproductive health survey in provincial prisons. And I'll give you a couple of examples. So 40% of the women who responded to the survey, and almost every single person in each of these institutions did, identify as queer. Has any element of prison healthcare ever been oriented to deal with that? That's not the prison's fault, right? Yes, it is the fault of the criminal justice system that we hyper incarcerate queer people, but this is not the prison's fault that there isn't a health system that's organized around queer needs. 40% of respondents have had hepatitis C. They didn't get it in the prison. Maybe some of them did, but most of them did not, right? They just arrived at the provincial prison. This is the situation. The prison didn't give it to them. But obviously the prison needs to have an awareness that this is the situation. Hep C is treatable. These are the kind of things that we need to kind of orient. It's become the prison's problem now. They're in there now, so it's the problem of the prison now. And when they, as Kathy was saying, that's a Carter Ramirez study out of Ontario that showed any incarceration has this impact on neonatal outcomes. That just shows you that when you're controlling for all of these other factors, poverty, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, that incarceration has this lifetime impact on you. So you go into this environment with all these additional needs compared to the general population, and then you live in an environment that is inherently, by definition, of course, it's restrictive, of course, it's stressful. and you're going to leave with additional health needs. And so when I look at this from the perspective of nursing, of course, I'm always thinking about we've just created more health needs in a system that we know across the country, especially in primary care, the domain of most of what I'm talking about, we're so strapped. So why do we have one public service that is causing so much extra demand on another public service? Where is the reorientation of the balance between health and security? I think one of the things in this particular question, how does the context of the prison contribute to maternal mental illness? Again, it's thinking about all of those predispositions that you started with, that you're then going into this environment with. And we know that one of the greatest risk factors for a peripartum mood disorder, psychosis, depression, anxiety is pre-existing mood disorder, psychosis, et cetera. So we can predict that we are going to have additional hardship in this period. And given that we can predict that, there should be, and if we're going to incarcerate people in this period, then there has to kind of be this real amplification of energy to make that pregnancy tolerable. Obviously, I don't want to get into some fetal rights argument for so many different reasons. But we do need to think about the health of the pregnancy, and we do have an obligation to make that the healthiest pregnancy that it can be. So saying a bunch of different things here, but I think really when we can recognize what that context is and think about what Robin was saying about understanding that pregnancy and caregiving should be mitigating factors in sentencing is really crucial, because this problem started before it arrived at the prison doors, and there's only so much that can happen that can be remedied within the prison context. There's some things that are fundamentally incompatible with the prison context and with maternal well-being. So we really do have to back it up and prevent that escalation in the first place.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to our next question, and this question will be answered by Robin, Martha, and Kathy. The question is, how do mother and child programs affect the mother's rehabilitation and reintegration into society? Robin, you can go first if you like.
Is this on? Yep. Well, the trauma of having your child taken from you automatically is a tremendous, I mean, that would be very, very difficult to get over and be very contrary to healing and avoidance of future problems. That's about, when I was saying I would answer this question, then I looked at it more deeply and I thought, what am I actually going to say? And this is all I have to say is it's inflicting huge trauma and violence on the woman to do this to her. And that violence was recognized in the interim report of the inquiry into murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit people, that taking away your child is an act of violence. And so that is an imposition of violence that makes it really, that exacerbates the road to being happy in society.
I've definitely heard women say, like, I am in here because last time they took my baby. And so then you spiral. Then it causes criminalization to have that happen to you. I also, some of the examples I gave, the intention there was to show, and those are real stories, the intention is to show how are we, it's too complicated, right? So you're going to have this mother-child program. That sounds really great. And even for the people, those, you know, star people who make it in, then what do you do when you have to leave? Because you're supposed to leave prison. You're supposed to leave and reintegrate, and the halfway house won't take you, and child welfare's staring down your neck, and you can't afford housing, and so even if we create this utopia in the mother-child program, what happens the next day? And you've set up a system where you have child welfare, you're under the microscope. So even if you're no longer under CSC's microscope, you're still institutionalized basically. And it's still received as a threat to be under child welfare surveillance. It's still received as violence, even if you didn't have the violence of the separation. So there's complexity, you know, I talked earlier about balancing health versus security. And then there's also this other whole system of child protection. And we're operating highly siloed and with conflicting, what's the word I'm going for here? Conflicting, like, I guess, agendas, you know.
I won't repeat some of the things you said, and again, I think one of the key factors there, and probably is at the forefront of some of our minds in terms of corrections, is really that need to balance health and that need for bonding with the safety and security of the institution and the safety and security of that child. And you know what? Again, everybody making those decisions come with their own informed experiences and their lens, and honestly would die on the sword saying I am protecting that child in some of these decisions. It is difficult when you are signing and making that decision to rise above some of those lenses, whether it be a colonial lens, whether it be a correctional lens, to rise above those inputs and really try and make that utopian decision. And so that is the struggle that we all face, whether it be healthcare or academia or corrections, is really, you know what, there is an uncomfortable space where we need to tolerate that uncomfortable space in order to come out with better outcomes and to come out with learning. Because you know what, I will say, you know what, we get defensive at times when we hear this, you know, and pops into my mind is the first response about saying, but you know what, we're doing this and we're doing this and we're doing this. You know, to say, you know, we're not bad people, you know, and that's just a natural human response with regards to it. And so it does take that skill to openly listen. And you know, I say this to my children: listen to understand, not to respond. It is a skill, and it is a skill that at times is difficult, because it's that uncomfortable space that will then bring us to a better outcome, and to be able to ask the questions, to really delve into, okay, why do we need the approval of Child and Family Services? Like, what are we going for there? You know, rather than just saying that's what we need. And so I do think you made reference to evaluation process that we're going through right now. And you know what? We absolutely acknowledge the lack of data, that, you know, we need that data to make informed decisions, to make decisions based in fact and not just in storytelling. So I do think, again, that balancing and that movement, hopefully towards more collaboration, is underway. It takes time and it takes perseverance. And you know what? It takes people with lived experience as a mother, as a decision maker, as somebody who is now working and maybe lost their child at one point. It takes those influences to affect change and then to be able to sustain that change, especially when we are in a large, complex organization that's very reactive. And so there are incidents that, you know what, sometimes it sets us back a little bit. And then hopefully we can take 2 steps forward and another step back and continue to move forward in those places.
Okay, our final question is, how would you like to see the development of mother and child units behind bars in the next decade? This will be answered by Robin.
Yeah, I mean, I think the resource that I looked to was the guidelines for the implementation of mother-child units in Canadian correctional facilities issued by the Collaborating Centre for Prison Health and Education out of UBC in 2015. BC has the longstanding program started, I think, in 1972 within its provincial system. And I think, you know, the details are there in terms of practical setting up of a prison nursery. And around the world, there's examples too. In Europe, there's no lack of information. I think that what is lacking is what was raised about what happens after someone is released, ensuring there's somewhere for them to go as an appropriate stepping stone. And so that continuum of care is necessary. So in 10 years, what I would like to see is 0 automatic separations, because it's not assumed that that's appropriate, that in every case, there is a specific review of the situation and a willingness and desire to meet people where they are at and bring them into the best possible scenario given where they're at, and not be punitive anymore. Because of the legacy of colonization that we're working with that is just so profoundly disproportionately punitive. And I really just don't want to lose sight of that. I think that whenever we're talking about incarceration, we have to keep that disproportionate application in the front of our minds, because it's not, none of this is happening in a vacuum. It's happening within society and trends of oppression that need to be rejected. So that's what I would say. Look to the literature, make sure we're putting due process into the systems, make sure that there's evident places for people to go, make sure that once they're released, there's somewhere to go, and just to stop this idea that as soon as someone falls, that's it. They're out of the running to be a mother, and that's it. Their child is not going to have that opportunity, because that's intergenerational trauma continuing. Thanks.
So we do have the opportunity, if you'd like to each provide final comments on improving the lives of mothers in prison. If you choose, it's optional. Anybody have any final comments?
I'll come back to the practical issue of the data, because I think this is a really, you know, it's one thing that you don't really have to get defensive about, right? It's data. And so the example of the flag in the offender management system that goes on when you're in the mother-child program, when somebody turns it on, and it's arbitrary when they turn it on. Are you 1 month pregnant? Are you 9 months pregnant? And so clarifying, just fix that one data point, make that a real data point that there's a baby that's alive in the program. Switch it on. You know, we really need to improve all of these data elements to be able to say something sensible about this. There have been studies in France that looked at the outcome of prison nurseries and found that you were more likely to have your baby permanently apprehended from you if you participated in a prison nursery. So it's entirely possible being in the mother-child program is actually worse for your long-term mother-child bond. We don't know. We don't have the data. So we keep making these statements based on, like Kathy said, on storytelling. And we don't have to do that. We know all is very clear, the indicators we should be collecting. And we should be looking at it and seeing what it is we are doing. And really start there.
You know what? I'll just close by saying, looking forward to getting the data as much as you are. I think it will be a good basis to continue the conversation, and that improving the lives of mothers in the institution, as well as all women and all men in the institution, is really the goal in terms of everything we do with regards to the research, the ongoing education, and